So today our speaker is Michael Dyer, our senior maritime historian. He's been with us since 2001. He was actually the curator of maritime history and a librarian at the Kendall Whaling Museum from 94 to 2001. And then when the Sharon Museum closed down in 2001, we acquired much of their collection as well as some of their staff, including Mike. And so he's been with us for the last 14 years. He's published a number of different papers. He's crafted many of the exhibits. Actually, 2 of them you'll see upstairs when you go up there today for your tour. And he's also cataloged much of the collection here at the Whaling Museum. And just a little side note that he didn't write down for me, but this is one of the coolest things I think I've heard at the museum in the last 5 years. Last month, February 25th, he got a phone call from Los Angeles, and they had a small museum there, and they found a number of different harpoons with bomb lances. And bomb lances in the 1800s were designed to explode. And so the bomb squad actually came to the museum, and they were trying to determine, do they need to remove these safely? How do they take care of them? So they called Michael Dyer. First thing, and you had already received 2 other phone calls from bomb squads over the years? Yes, this was the 3rd one. So this is commonplace for him to get calls from around the country from bomb squads. And he was able to determine exactly what kind of bomb lances they were, where they were made, and are they basically posing a threat now or not. And so they were able to safely remove them. So that's Mike Dyer. Originally we were going to talk today about Energy and Enterprise, which is a large exhibit that we have opening up in about 3 weeks. Originally it was planned to open 2 months ago. So rather than talk about an exhibit that's not yet open and then kind of tease you for the next 3 weeks, he's actually going to talk to you today about the art of the Yankee Whale Hunt. So the artwork inspired by the actual process that we went through here. And then you'll see the exhibits associated with it that he curated. And then over the next couple of weeks, as you continue to come for more lectures, we will have that exhibit open, and then you'll be able to see it as well. So without any further ado, here's Michael Dyer.
Well, good afternoon, folks. Thanks for coming out this afternoon. I was told on the way in here, I'm not joking, this is something I was told on the way in, that there's a distinct possibility that at some point during this lecture this afternoon, the fire alarm could in fact go off. So, if the fire alarm goes off, you are to not go through that door or those doors. You're to stay seated and wait for the fire alarm to stop going off, at which point then we'll continue on with what we're going to be doing here. I kind of have a habit when I'm speaking, especially in a situation like this one, of wandering around. So I may actually sort of go out from behind the podium at some point, and if I do, I'll try to talk to the people in the very last row back there so that everybody can hear. I'm writing a book, Art of the Yankee Whale Hunt. There's a reason that I'm writing this book, and that is that, astonishingly enough, it's only ever been tackled by one other historian, and that is the original director, or the second director, I think, of the Kendall Whaling Museum. His name was Ken Martin, and Ken Martin wrote a book back in 1982 called Whaleman's Paintings and Drawings, and it covered the Kendall collection, and it did a pretty good job. I wrote my master's thesis on the history of American whaling illustration, and so that's what sort of got me into whaling in the first place. And I started to look deeply at whaleman's art and at whaling art in general, which is a pretty good thing, for somebody working in whaling history to look at all the pictures and get to know them. And one of the great facts of this history is that for the scale of the industry, America's public output of art relating to whaling is pretty pathetic. The book illustrations that came out were largely inaccurate and redundant. Benjamin Russell, New Bedford's great son, is responsible for some of the greatest Yankee whaling art, public art. And the 2 prints that were produced by that wonderful character from New London, from New York, Cornelius Halsart. They were published in 1835, capturing a sperm whale and a shoal of sperm whale off the island of Hawaii. We really don't have much art, but the good news is we don't have much public art. The good news is there's an astonishing amount of private art that was drawn by whalemen themselves. These pictures are so far above and beyond in quality what was being produced in public, especially the drawings of whales themselves, which I'm going to show you one here after a while. And as you sit here in 2015 and you look at it, you'll say, well, that's not such a big deal. However, when I tell you about when it was drawn, it'll be perhaps eye-opening. So what I have on the screen here are 4 drawings that were done by 2 different whalemen, what I call the Provincetown School. We have here the greatest collection of Provincetown whaling art, and it's some of the greatest whaling art ever drawn by anybody anywhere. But this chapter is the creative process, and so I'm here to tell you that when you look through the art drawn by the Yankee whalemen into their logbooks and journals, all these pictures are not created equal. They don't all mean the same thing. They weren't drawn with the same intention. And so a good example is this one. What you see there is an abstract. It's a whaling abstract. It was drawn by Joseph Washington Tuck of Provincetown. He was a first mate on a square rigger. I think it was the Samuel Robertson, or the Parker Cook, the Parker Cook of Provincetown. And he was a career whaleman. So what he did was, every time there was a whaling encounter, whether it was a win, lose, or draw, he wrote down the latitude and longitude. He wrote down, where the action took place, the species of whale that was being hunted, and then he drew a picture of it. And he did this for his own reference. Now that's interesting. We'll get to why it's really, really interesting here by and by. These bottom pictures were drawn at the same time, mid-1840s, by Joseph Bogart Hersey, also of Provincetown. This particular drawing is, in my mind, one of the greatest American whaling pictures ever drawn by anybody ever. It has virtually everything from the cat sitting on the whaleboat watching this whole process to all the different species of sharks and fish and birds in the water. And these guys here, with their pole windlass, not a brake windlass, not a big pump windlass like what you see on the Charles W. Morgan, but a pole windlass. And the galley there, that's not the try-works, that's where the cook is making their food. And there's no chimneys on the try-works, and there's no masthead hoops for the guys to stand in. And there's no suspended cutting stage, and there's no house on the back of the ship. In short, this vessel looks absolutely nothing like the Lagoda. It looks nothing like the photographs of whalers that you see. It looks nothing like the Charles W. Morgan looks now. It looks like the Charles W. Morgan looked when it was built, but not the way it looks now. That's kind of interesting. But I'll tell you, why I'm approaching this creative process chapter. Who saw the Morgan come into New Bedford last summer? Oh, man, you guys are the best. That was the 38th voyage of the Charles W. Morgan, and what Mystic Seaport did was they invited people to apply to be 38th voyagers. And you had to have a reason for applying. So you went through the application process, and you sort of told them what you wanted to do and why you wanted to be a 38th voyager. So I applied, Here I am, staff member, you know, maritime historian at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. And I'm applying to be a 38th Voyager on the Charles W. Morgan. Now, I did that for two reasons, maybe three, but two big reasons. One was I wanted to be on the Charles W. Morgan personally. But the second reason was that when the Morgan went out of the Acushnet River en route to Mystic Seaport in 1942, I think, was it? 1942? William H. Tripp, the curator of this museum, steered the ship down the harbor. Now, it seemed incumbent upon me to try to be on board, to try to represent the Old Dartmouth Historical Society, the New Bedford Whaling Museum, to be, in essence, Bill Tripp. Now, those are big shoes to fill. But, you know, I applied for it, you know, and I spun them this yarn, you know. They said, well, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do this? And I told them, well, I want to know what it felt like to be a whaleman, and I wanted to be on board and approaching, and see the shore the way whalemen would have seen it, and all this malarkey, you just tell them the thing. And, they said, okay, you can be a 38th Voyager. And I was like, great, this is a wonderful thing. To tell you the truth, folks, I told them that I wanted to include my experience in the creative process chapter of The Art of the Yankee Whale Hunt that I'm working on. I didn't realize what would happen. And even I didn't realize it until considerably along in the Morgan's progression. And so you're just going to have to stick around till the end of the talk to see the punchline to this whole thing. And it's actually quite a good punchline. So not all drawings are created equally. Antebellum America was a maritime nation, and New Bedford was a maritime city. Its whole purpose for being was to hunt the oceans of the world and to create a product. And to do that, mariners needed to know how to navigate. And in order to learn how to navigate, you could do it in a couple of different ways. You could either sail on shipboard as a green hand and know nothing and stay in the trades for a long time and learn navigation. And if you look through the 2,300 logbooks and journals we have up the hill, you'll see that many, many, many young men learned to navigate on shipboard. Or you could go into the coastal trades. And many, many people, especially from Fairhaven and Westport and Marion, Mattapoisett, excuse me, Rochester, learned sailing on the coastal trades from carrying New Bedford or New England corn or barrel staves or some sort of commodity from here, fish, to the West Indies or to or Carolina, and come back with raccoon skins and deer skins and oranges and cotton. And come back, and so it was a constant coastal trade. And what I tell people is, if you go stand on the overpass of the interstate and watch the truck traffic going by, that's the equivalent of the coastal trade in antebellum, and actually 18th and 19th century America. You could stand down at Beavertail Lighthouse and just watch the schooners go by, watch the sloops go by, watch the hermaphrodite brigs go by, going from they're going from Portland and Portsmouth and Boston and Nantucket and Sandwich and Provincetown and Chatham. You name the town, they're going someplace. They're going to Jersey. They're going to Philadelphia. They're going to Virginia. They're just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth because there was no railroad really to speak of, and that's the way commerce was done. So you could learn, and plenty of whalemen did learn before going whaling, especially out of Westport. The Westport guys, if you really look at the Westport guys, you'll see that they would go farming through the winter, they'd go on a coastal voyage, they'd come back, they'd go on a whaling voyage for a year or a year and a half. They'd come back, they'd farm for a while, they'd cut firewood, they'd go on a coasting voyage. They'd come back, they'd go on a whaling voyage. They would just sort of do this. It was that ingrained in the experience. But you could also go to navigation school. And here you see, David Leslie is teaching navigation school right here in New Bedford. And part of the process for learning to navigate is actually beautifully drawn and exactly written mathematical equations. And part of the training was to learn how to draw a ship in the position that it would be in its navigational logarithm. And so that's part of why these vessels sort of look like that. They all kind of look alike. And here it is in practice. So this was this early sealing voyage out of Newburyport to the coast of South America. And you could see the Minerva, the guy, this was the captain who drew this in, Rubin Jones, and he drew it just like he was trained to do. It looks just exactly like the navigation exercise books. And this is a much later view that was kept by this George Bailey on one of Daniel Mackenzie's vessels. Daniel Mackenzie was a New Bedford master, famous New Bedford master. And one of the really interesting things that's coming out of this research is that art was produced under certain masters, and there was no art produced under other masters. And so people like Daniel Mackenzie, there's a bunch of illustrated stuff that comes out of Daniel Mackenzie's influence. William Whitfield. Show of hands, everybody know who William Whitfield was? Manjaro, Nakahama, and the William and Eliza, and the John Howland. People that sailed for William Whitfield created art. Benjamin Clark, was another one. You see it, that there's a pattern of repetition, that artwork is created under certain people and not under others. So in this particular instance, these are examples of navigation art. Now, this is not exactly art, but I love showing people these because this captures what a whaling voyage is all about, Is that the passage of a clipper ship? Why not? You're shaking your head. Why is that not the passage of a clipper ship? A clipper ship, the point of a clipper ship, yeah, as fast as you can get there. From point A to point B, as fast as you can possibly get there. So from New York to Liverpool, from Liverpool to Melbourne, from Melbourne to San Francisco, as fast as you can go. And so a whaler is going nowhere. This is where they're going, day in and day out. This is on the coast of Africa. It's a right whaling voyage on the coast of Africa, so they're not going anywhere. But it's really, really interesting nonetheless, and kind of educational, because I believe that I just taught you something. I think so, maybe not. But it's a pretty interesting, drawing. It's not, it's not as nice as these other navigation drawings, but they're interesting nonetheless. So here's a wonderful thing that, again, is in a category all by itself. This fella, we don't even know his name. He calls himself Lord Tom Noddy of Bomcack. And a Tom Noddy is a fool, and I believe that Bomcack, as near as I can tell, has something to do with the work of literature, Casanova. Bomcack has something to do with Casanova. And so this guy's calling himself a fool of a woman chaser. And he's a sailor. And in his drawing, in his spare time, literally, he says, I have nothing to do now, so I will draw a picture in my whaling journal. And what this guy did, was he had on board a copy of Darcy Lever's Young Sea Officer's Sheet Anchor. And Darcy Lever's Young Sea Officer's Sheet Anchor was a guidebook for sailors. It taught you how to make knots. It taught you how to box haul. It taught you how to kedge with an anchor. It taught you everything you needed to know to be a professional sailor. And this guy had a copy on board, and he drew. This is the actual, illustration from Darcy Lever, which was first published in 1811. And this guy drew this in about 1830. He just drew it in his book. And he did that page after page. He didn't trace it. He drew it freehand. So he was keeping himself busy learning how to be a professional sailor in many more ways than just learning how to navigate. He was, in fact, learning everything there was to know about the ship, too. And so these illustrations kind of they look alike from this period. This is a picture of the brig Telemachus that was, it's a very typical 1820s period illustration, and that was the ship was spoken, meaning that the brig by chance. So this is a logbook kept on board the brig by chance of Dartmouth, and they spoke the Telemachus and they took a whale. And that's just a fact that happened on the voyage. And in the logbook, it's a logbook. Logbook is there to keep facts. A journal is there for anything you want to write down. So, if I'm going on a whaling voyage and I'm not an officer, I'm just some guy, I can go on my whaling voyage and I'll go down to Tabor's and buy my journal and take it on board, and I can write anything I want. I can write down, that I miss my sister, and that her pies were very good, and I don't like the first mate, and the weather is bad, and here's a picture of a fish that we caught, and then you just sort of go on and on. You can write anything you want to. Many times journals are almost indistinguishable from logbooks because the guys that were keeping them were learning to be professional mariners, and they were aspiring to become officers on shipboard, maybe later masters, captains. So one of the regular aspects of keeping a logbook is to record ships seen and spoken, and whales seen and taken. So notice that this whale is drawn into the book. That's interesting. We'll get to why that's interesting in a minute. And here's the Telemachus. Now, it's interesting that the Telemachus was drawn in, and this is why these guys would do this. Because about a week after this, the brig by chance spoke the Telemachus, a great hurricane blew up and totally destroyed the Telemachus. She was completely dismasted. This was in the Caribbean. And the vessel was lost. All the crew was saved by another passing vessel. But this is important. So, when one vessel speaks another vessel, that information is recorded in the logbook. That same kind of information can then be passed along and along down the line until the people back home can eventually learn that this vessel was seen and spoken in this particular place and time, and all was well on board. It's the facts of what's going on. And the same thing with the whales. So when whales were killed, you draw in a little picture of a whale. Again, from the 1820s, this is the ship Susan of Nantucket, and it was spoken on board the ship Rodman of New Bedford. And so here's a picture of the Susan. Now, it just so happens that on board the Susan was a guy named Frederick Myrick, who was one of the great scrimshanders, probably the greatest scrimshander in American history. And these three teeth are held in our collection here. And if you want to compare Whaleman's drawings to Scrimshaw, you can do a really good job of it by looking at, Myrick's work. Here's a really beautiful, pristine whaler. And, it doesn't look unlike this picture of the Telemachus. It's a bit more developed than this marginal picture of the ship Susan, but you can see the precision with which the scrimshaw was drawn. And you can see that same precision reflected in whalemen's work. So this is the thing. You know, all the time, everybody loves logbook stamps. They love logbook stamps. Logbook stamps, as near as I could tell from my research, logbook stamps first appear about 1822. At least the earliest one in our collection, and we have the largest collection in the world, is 1822. That's interesting. One would imagine that there have always been logbook stamps. And yet, if you think about the way the industry was developing, after the War of 1812, the U.S. had free passage on the open ocean. Our Navy was strong. We were an accepted international power. And the whaling fleets of Nantucket and New Bedford and Fairhaven and other towns in New London were able to freely pursue their trade, and they did. And the way they built that trade was by accruing knowledge about where whales were seen, where they were taken. And a way to do that really effectively is to stamp a picture in the logbook. So at the end of the voyage, you take that logbook and you give it to the owner, and the owner can go through it real quick and see where all the whales were seen and taken, which he would then write down, and before his next vessel set sail, he would give that piece of paper to the master with instructions saying, I want you to cruise on the River de la Plata, on the Plate grounds, from April to June, and take, say, 600 barrels of right whale oil before proceeding to a cruise for sperm oil on the line in the Pacific. So they knew what they were doing by the mid-1820s, before the vessels ever even set sail. There was this accrued knowledge. And my hypothesis, and you can prove me wrong or not, it's entirely up to you. We have a great library, and I want to see you all up there doing all the research so you can prove me wrong, that whale stamps were actually the means, one of the means by which Yankee whaling succeeded as well as it did. It was a quick and easy way to get at the information. So here's the creative process. We have a full-blown ship here, and you can see the drawings in various stages of completion. And so, you know, the whaleman would start the hull first, sort of draw in the bowsprit, color the thing in, draw in the davits, put the sails in the rigging, and then wind up with a full-blown drawing of a ship. So this is not going to set the world on fire, but it's more than you knew 5 minutes ago. So that's pretty good. And here is another really interesting example. You see that there's a drawing here, and there's no drawing here. And what that tells me is that the guy who kept this, and his name was William Maxfield, I don't know whether he drew those ships in when he got home, whether he drew them in a week later, whether he drew them in 3 weeks later. You look at the finished illustrated journal, you look at this and your eyes pop out of your head and you say, wow, isn't it astonishing what these guys could do on shipboard? Well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. We don't know for sure. All you have is the thing in front of you, and they never tell you, or they seldom tell you what they're actually up to. So here is an incomplete one, and it was drawn by this guy, William Maxfield. His older brother, Warren Maxfield, drew this one, and it is an absolute masterpiece of American whaling art. And this is the copy of the Voyage of the Chile that's in the Whaling Museum library. There's another copy of another voyage that's at the Houghton Library at Harvard University, and I went up there and I looked at them. I looked at it to see, you know, because it was kept by Warren Maxfield. I was like, oh, well, it's kept by Warren Maxfield. It's got to be fabulous. And sure enough, it was equally fabulous in almost exactly the same way as the Chile is equally. He kept them both. He illustrated them and colored them both the same way. And these are completely separate voyages. This, William Folger's title page, when you talk about the creative process, I mean, my goodness, what's more over the top than these two journal pages? You get the idea that these guys are really patriotic whalemen and proud of what they're doing and very proud of the ships that they're on. And so this art begins to create in our minds a bit of the persona of the people involved in this in ways that maybe Scrimshaw doesn't always do it. The thing about Scrimshaw, what's absolutely fascinating about Scrimshaw is its anonymity. Your imagination can run wild because you got no facts. You got nothing. You got this thing, this sperm whale tooth with a picture on it. And it's absolutely amazing thing, and your mind can just go. And you can think anything you want to about it. When you put that in the context of whalemen's journal art, things begin to shape up a little bit. You begin to get a bit of more of a global picture, or of a round picture of what whalemen were experiencing, what they thought about it, what they felt about it. Not all these pictures are created equal. Ephraim Harding from Fairhaven. He's a great whaleman master, whaling master from Fairhaven in 1842. Get this. Ephraim Harding only drew a couple of little pictures in his whaling journal. It was master's log. It was his log. It wasn't the log of the voyage. It was a log that he kept of the voyage. So we call it a master's log. He drew a couple of pictures. He drew a picture of a dolphin. He drew a picture of a landfall. He sailed on the ship Arab of Fairhaven, from Fairhaven to the Azores to the Cape Verde Islands, around the Cape of Good Hope, through the Straits of Madagascar, and into the Indian Ocean without ever once seeing a whale. They saw no whales the whole time. And then when they get to the Gulf of Aden, in the northwestern part of the Indian Ocean, there's a giant pod of whales that they ran into, sperm whales, and they killed 14 whales, and they kept 11 of them. And that's what he drew, that event. So month after month after month after month of sailing from Fairhaven, the whole way around the world into the Indian Ocean, they don't even see a whale, and then one day they kill 14 and keep 11. So Ephraim Harding was impressed. And this is what it takes to impress a whaling master enough to actually draw the picture in his book. This is another great thing. Perry G. Wing of Westport, Massachusetts. We have 3 journals by Perry G. Wing, and Perry G. Wing was probably the single most boring American whaleman I have ever encountered. Perry G. Wing, he had not an iota of imagination at all. And the only thing that I have is this fabulously illustrated journal that's Perry G. Wing's journal. I mean, it says, he writes his name right on the flyleaf, Perry G. Wing, Westport, Massachusetts. And it's this fabulous, this amazingly illustrated thing. So what it is, and this again gets us back to this, to the point that I'm making. There's a guy named Schoenfelter, William Schoenfelter, and he evidently took it upon himself to become pals with Perry G. Wing on the bark Dunbarton of Westport, and he completely illustrated Wing's journal himself, and he wrote his name here, right there it is. And he dated it 1855. And this is a pretty astonishing whaling picture. You know, it's got everything. You know, it's got this giant sperm whale with his flukes. It's got your 6 guys in the boat. They're going on to the whale. They're in a pod of whales. You know, this is a great whaling experience. And this guy draws this in Wing's journal. And, you know, if you weren't paying really, really close attention, you'd think Perry Wing did this. As a matter of fact, I did think Perry Wing did this. And it was only through, you know, examining them a bit more closely that I was able to really come to the conclusion that it wasn't him at all, that it was a shipmate who was friends with him, who illustrated his journal for him. Okay, so I promised earlier on that these pictures were drawn in 1841, 1841. And I can tell you, folks, that in the scientific literature of the period, there is nothing that even approximates this kind of accuracy of a Northwest Coast right whale. Nothing. You know, when you read in Moby Dick about about what he has to say about how, you know, he compares the species of whales with the sizes of books. He calls them duodecimo whales and octavo whales and folio whales. He's completely poking fun at the scientific establishment, saying that the only thing these guys know about whales is what they see in books. They don't know anything about whales. This guy knew about whales. This guy was able to draw. This is 40 years before Charles Melville Scammon wrote The Marine Mammals of the Northwestern Coast of North America, which at that time had probably the greatest illustrations of whales, really, that had ever been drawn publicly. But this whaleman drew it ahead of time. And not only that, he must have been quite a character because, you know, as whales were seen, he'd draw the flukes in. But then he wasn't satisfied to just simply draw the flukes in. He had to turn it into a locomotive whale. You know, yeah, there's the locomotive. It's a locomotive whale, and it sort of looks like a bull, or this, you know, this monstrous fish eating a monstrous sort of wolf-like, you know, thing that he's created. This guy was bored to tears with what he was doing as he's drawing these amazing pictures in his journal. This again is a whaleman's is a master's log. So it's not really a journal. It's not really a logbook. It's a master's log. These are among my favorites. The bottom one, excuse me. The bottom one is held at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem. This one was in the Kendall collection, the ship South Carolina right whaling, and the ship South Carolina sperm whaling. If all you had to look at was the ship South Carolina sperm whaling, you'd think, woohoo, you're waving the flag. This is a great picture of the American sperm whale fishery in action. You know, this is it. This is the greatest thing. Well, when you look at it, when you come to look at it actually, that voyage of the South Carolina captured one sperm whale. It was a right whaling voyage. They captured one 60-barrel sperm whale, and there it is. It was a right whaling voyage, an extremely successful right whaling voyage. They returned like 2,500 barrels or 3,000 barrels of right whale oil and 60 barrels of sperm oil. But if this was all you had to go on, you would imagine that the South Carolina was a great sperm whaler. So here's one of the kickers. Does anybody recognize this? It's been splashed over every publication, every public sort of whaling, illustrated whaling history out there. Time, Life, American Heritage. You know, it's kind of the quintessential illustrated whaling logbook. And I'm going to tell you now, and it's a good thing you're all sitting down, everything in color is fake. It's all fake. And the reason that I can tell you this is that this drawing appears in a perfectly boring, North Atlantic sperm whaling voyage from New Bedford in 1880s. 1880s. It's the same drawing that appears in this 1834 voyage of the William Baker of Warren, Rhode Island. So there's no way that the same guy was shipping out in the 1880s, it was shipping out in the 1830s and illustrating it the whole time. So this was part of the result of this kind of research that I've been doing, and it's really, really pretty fascinating. Both of these pieces were in the Andrew H. Snow collection that came into the old Dartmouth Historical Society in about 1916, 1918 in there. And there's evidence. This picture right here is copied almost exactly from a magazine illustration that was published in 1894. So these illustrations happened sometime between 1894 and 1916, 1918, in there somewhere, when the stuff came to the Whaling Museum. Now, I used a pretty strong word. I said it was fake, and I don't really, I don't know. That's a little arrogant, I think. I don't know if they're fakes. They're just not what they seem to be. Somebody who knew what they were doing felt like illustrating an old logbook. And there was probably a pile of them, and he just did it. And I don't know what the intent was, but I do know that this is not right. And neither is that, or that. The logbook itself is great. Nothing wrong with the logbook. It's just that it's been embellished by some unknown whaling fanatic in the 1890s. Okay, so here's another little creative. Now, you're not tired of me yet, are you? Okay, good. Because we're almost getting to the punchline here. So here's a book illustration. This was an illustration from the Wanderings and Adventures of Rubin Delano. And it was published in 1846 and illustrated by Manning and Hartwell of Boston, Massachusetts. And Manning and Hartwell were, these are some of my favorite sort of book illustrators of the period. They're wonderful. But they didn't know anything about whales. So your sperm whales got teeth on the top and teeth on the bottom. You know, they sort of look like alligators. But they knew their ships, and their ships are pretty good. And this kid, 12 years old, kid from Fairhaven, evidently had a copy of this pamphlet with him. Or there was a copy, or he saw a copy on a GAM, or he saw a copy, in some port where he visited. But no matter what, he saw this picture, and he copied it. There's the sperm whale. There it is again. It's got the teeth in it. There's the ship. But the really interesting part, the creative process part, was that this kid was on a bowhead whaling voyage to the Western Arctic. And so he took this drawing, and he drew bowhead whales into it. So he took the existing drawing, he copied it, and then he adapted it to his own experience. So I think that's a pretty neat thing. I think that's a pretty interesting part of the creative process. So what? Okay? This is the so what part. This is where I got excited about the Charles W. Morgan and the 38th voyage. And that was when the Morgan was off of Provincetown in Stellwagen Bank. The ship encountered humpback whales. And the crew had the opportunity to lower their boats and to pull those boats into a pod of humpback whales. And I don't know who took the photographs, and I'm embarrassed to say, but I'm going to find out, and I'm going to find out soon. I should have found out before I came to talk to you today so I could give them due full credit. I'm sorry to say that I didn't. But what these photographers did was allow me to take the illustrations that I'm looking at and figure out whether they're any darn good or not. And so here's John Martin's drawing of the Lucian of Wilmington. that was drawn in 1842. And here's the stern of the Charles W. Morgan. What a comparison. So is the logbook art any good? Is it right? Can we trust it? Can we learn anything from it? Well, I think that we can. We knew that these teeth were derived from this drawing, which was not really a drawing. It's a woodcut. It's a printer's device, and it appeared on the title pages of many of these published journals. But if you look at the cant of the ship, you look at the set of the sails, and you look at this photograph of the Morgan, they match up almost exactly. This is American maritime history in your face. This is Clifford Ashley. This is the Charles W. Morgan. Did he capture it? Are the proportions right? Is the water right? Are the boats right? I think that they really are right. I think that he captured it. This is one of my favorite ones of all. So here's a whaleboat going on to a right whale with the flukes up in the air. And there it is. There's the whaleboat right next to the humpback whale. You can look at the photo and you can look at the drawing and you can learn something from each. So when Joseph Washington Tuck drew this view, you see these many times, these kind of views. And you see the whale flukes are there in the foreground, and you see the boats, and now we have the opportunity to say, that's actually what it looked like. And the same thing here. So there's the fluke of a humpback whale. And, if that isn't the exact, this happens to be a sperm whale, but it's the exact thing. You can look at it, you can trust it, and you can really sort of begin to believe in the whaleman's experience. Very rare view of humpbacking. And for some reason, Yankees hunted humpback whales all over the world, but nobody ever talks about it. And they almost never drew it. But here's a picture of a humpback whale. These guys are fast to the whale. They're bailing the water out of the boat. He's getting ready to lance the whale. And, is that right? And there's the actual humpback whale, and there's the actual boat, and there's the guys. And so it's a tremendous opportunity. This happens to be another of my favorites. J.W. Wynn, his name was, W-I-N-N, and we don't know anything about him. Drew this pastel drawing of a sperm whaling scene, and the vessels are they might as well be copied, one from the other. And so that's it, folks. That's what I wanted to talk to you and share with you this afternoon, and I'll be happy to take any questions or any comments, and if not, we'll go up to the gallery, and then you get to listen to me for another hour. Peggy. Very often, if you study the pictures, you can see that there's a pencil base. There's a pencil base underneath, and then it's a watercolor on top of that. By the same token, some guys were confident enough with a pen to just draw with a pen. Sometimes they were confident enough to just draw with watercolors, and there's no pencils at all. So it varies, and every single one of these is a unique work of art. And again, they don't all mean the same thing, which I find absolutely fascinating, because when you approach a body of work like that, you would imagine that there's going to be some real overlap. And in this particular case, the only real overlap is that whales and ships in the margins of logbooks often appear for a reason. But other than that, all bets are off. Carol.
The whaling stamps that you showed, one, what were they made of? Secondly, you had flukes, a fluke stamp and a pole stamp and they seem to have particular little tails somewhere in the stamps. And
Yep.
but only half of it. And then I'm going to ask the silliest question. Did they have stamp pads? Did they just ink them with a pen or a brush or paint them?
Yeah, well, I don't know about the stamp pad thing. I honestly don't know. I know they got the ink onto the stamp somehow. The flukes, of course. Now this is standard. The standard response to the question is. What was the question? Okay, so what does a half stamp mean? And how do you ink the stamps? And what are the stamps made of? Right? So the stamps themselves could be made of bone or wood. I've seen them both. These are all wood. So these are all wood, and they're just a silhouette of a whale. This one, you'll see it has a hollow part in the middle of it. And what that was to record the number of barrels made by that whale. So this stamp would be stamped into the book, and it's hollow in the middle, and there would be a little number in that hollow. And it would say 30 or 60 or 175 or whatever. And that meant the number of barrels of oil that whale made. The standard response is that a fluke stamp means a whale that got away. It doesn't always mean that. Most of the time it means that, but it doesn't always mean that. So sometimes it means a whale that was taken. And this guy just happened to, that's the stamp that he used. So sometimes it means one thing. Most of the time it means one thing. Sometimes it means something else. Yes, ma'am.
You said that the Morgan that we saw last summer was very different from what it would have been when it was built.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean?
Well, ships of the 1840s. The question was that I made the inflammatory comment that the Charles W. Morgan as we see her today is probably not what she looked like when she was launched. And the only thing that I have to go on for that are the many, many dozens of whale ships of the 1830s and 40s and how they change after 1848, after the experience of bowhead whaling in the Western Arctic sort of changes the way Yankee whalers look. The weather is awful up there, and it's bitter, bitter cold. And so what you see is a house or a roof over the try-works. And in order to get the smoke out, they put chimneys. So the whalemen would install chimneys on the try-works, and that pair of chimneys sticks up. And then there can be a roof over the try-works, and the guys can work there because you can't boil oil when there's snow falling or rain falling. It could cause a fire. It could cause the oil to boil over. It's a very dangerous thing to do. Likewise with the deck house aft, and that is that it's bitter, bitter cold, and the men were under shelter. And so very often what we see, vessels from the 1820s, there's no deck house. Matter of fact, there's nothing. If the vessel's not boiling oil and there's no smoke coming up, the only way you could tell it was a whaler at all is if it had the boats hanging on the side of the ship. There's nothing to distinguish it. Today, now, if you had to draw a whaler, well, you're going to draw it with all the bells and whistles. You've got masthead hoops at the top, you've got 5 whale boats. You've got an after cabin. You have a midship sort of skids. You've got a try-works, 3-part boards that are hanging over the side of the vessel. It would look like, whoops, we'll go to the very end. It would look like this one. This is what it would look like. It's got your after house. It's got your 3-part cutting stage. You got masthead hoops up here. That's what it would look like. But a vessel from the 1830s, early 1840s, didn't look like that. It didn't have any of that stuff. So that was a question I always had for the mystic carpenters, for the shipwrights was, is there any evidence that the after cabin was added, that it was not there originally? And I never got a satisfactory answer on that. So I'll just stand up here and tell you that it wasn't there, and you can later on write a bad review of my book.
But that makes sense, because we know that when the Morgan was shipping out of California and in and out of Hawaii, they made a lot of changes, added a sun deck for the captain's wife.
That's right.
It just makes sense.
Yeah. They were flush decked. It may not have been, well, I'm not even 100% sure that the earliest whalers had wheels. I don't think they had wheels. I think they had big tillers. They had a big tiller, not a shin cracker wheel like you see on the Lagoda. Anybody else? You're all convinced, huh? All right, thank you very much.